Okay, shall we get going? So, I have an amazing panel of speakers who are ready and waiting to talk to us about their vision for the future. We also have a room full of people, which is wonderful. So, whether you're joining us in the morning or in the evening, a very warm welcome. So, welcome to this LGIU member event. Really thrilled to have so many people joining us from so many different councils across so many different places from the UK, Ireland, and Australia. My name's Heather Yedigaroff. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of LGIU, and it's a real pleasure to be your chair for today's discussion. Before we get into it, just wanted to take a very quick minute just to provide a very small amount of detail about the LGIU for those of you who maybe only really know us through our daily news emails or our briefings. We are a local government membership organisation. We're also an independent voice for the local government sector around the world. We support staff and councillors at 300 different member councils, as well as a group of subscribers from Australia. And our purpose across the world remains the same. It's to empower local democracy and local government. In practice, that means we're here to support you every day in the vital work you do for your communities. So our team of experts helps to keep you informed, engaged, connected and heard. We provide guidance on legislation and key developments, insight, analysis, shared learning, training and original research, not to mention events like the one we're here today. Obviously, staying on top of what's happening in local government is critically important, but there's also a real question about what's coming next. How can we in local government get ahead of the trends that are shaping the sector for the months and years to come? And that question brings me to today's discussion point. So the purpose of our event today is to think about what does the year ahead mean for the future of local government, and what can we do now to be ready for it? So the discussion we'll have today over the next 90 minutes is going to be framed around some of the key issues that we expect will define the year. So maybe not a prediction. We've had an interesting discussion before coming on this group about whether we can make predictions or whether it's just too difficult in the environment we're in at the moment. But some of the things we might talk about today include elections and political change, structural reform and devolution. That will maybe come up for England in particular, service delivery pressures, funding and financial pressures, and not to mention those wider perma-crisis pressures like housing, like community cohesion, and climate change. So, some big topics to discuss today, and really looking forward to getting into it, both with our speakers and with you, our audience. So, we have a panel of people from our different countries to give an overview of what they think is coming down the line in their different countries. But crucially, we'll then move on to hear from you about your priorities and the big challenges that you see on the horizon. So once we've heard from our speakers, we're going to go to some live polling, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. So when we get to the Q&A, we can talk this through, but you can either add your questions to the chat as we go, or the LGIU team can collate them, or there will be a chance to raise your hand. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker for today, who is Des Murray, Chief Executive of North Lanarkshire Council in Scotland, and until very recently, also the President of the Society of Local Authority Chief Executive of Scotland. So Des, so delighted to have you here today. We know you've got an incredibly busy day coming up. Really grateful to have you here to join us today. Love to hear from you about your predictions for the year ahead in Scotland.
Thank you, Heather, and morning, colleagues. I like the promotion you gave me there, Heather. I was previously known as chair of Solace in Scotland, but president sounds so much better. So I'm going to change my CV and put that on it. Okay, so colleagues, I think a few of us on the call this morning wanted to speak to you all. A kind of PowerPoint presentation, perhaps just with more kind of discussion type approach to some of the challenges. I don't know how well read or how experienced or knowledgeable you are, but when the session title come up, what does 2026 look like for local government? A kind of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy came into mind in two words, rather than mostly harmless, nothing good. So that was my presentation. Nothing good is going to come in 2026 for local government. Let me explain and perhaps play with your emotions a little bit. We're going to do that kind of three-act thing: fall in love, fall out of love, all comes good in the end type approach. So I think the problem we have, certainly in Scotland, so this is a year where this is the 30th anniversary of unitary authorities in Scotland. We've been around for 30 years now. fairly sizable organisations with a huge amount of responsibility around place and around people, and hugely impactful if we're good at what we do in terms of making improvements to people's lives. There's no doubt about that. The evidence, the research supports that fundamental relationship between local government and the people that they serve. But when it comes to respect, when it comes to recognition, and whether that recognition is through just language and relationship, or whether it's through funding and support, local government in Scotland comes fairly low down the priority list. There has been a conscious decision over many years through those unitary periods to deprioritise local government and reprioritise or further prioritise, if you wish, health and other areas of activity. And that's entirely understandable. That's the role of government to decide what's the priorities for the country and to get behind and deliver upon those priorities. But it hasn't worked. Scotland, if you were to sum it up today, you'll be looking at some fairly challenging environments around most areas of prominent social policy. We have massive challenges around housing and housing supply, and pressures around homelessness in some of our cities and indeed outlying areas. Our health statistics are nothing to be impressed about. And indeed, where I live in the west of Scotland, the average life expectancy is still falling, not increasing in this modern age, unlike the east of the country where it is increasing. We have a fundamental crisis around health and social care in the ageing population, and a bit like the wider health agenda. You can throw as much resource and as much money at it as you wish, but unless you're dealing with the fundamental challenges around when people enter that age and stage in life and that preventative role that local authorities have had so historically, then simply you're just going to soak up more and more and more of your money and resource in that acute response. We have fundamental challenges around capital. So government is cash short, not cash rich. The tax base and tax take for the country is stagnant, I think is a fair description for it. And therefore, as costs increase, labour, materials increase, the ability for that money to invest in major infrastructure decreases, becomes more challenging. And therefore, our real estate, our roads infrastructure, our health infrastructure are all seeing significant challenge and pressures, our prison infrastructure. So, not a lot of good news out there when you put all that together, is there? And then you bring in councils. And I'm going to talk about councils rather than local government, because to me, the council is the centre of all of that, and it is the agency with the most ability to impact positively in all those surrounding challenges. Sometimes you may have to do that without the support of central government in terms of policy or indeed funds. Find your own means, find your own ambition, find your own way. And I think there are opportunities to do so, there are flexibilities to do so, and I think government, give it its due, is keen to see us explore those flexibilities more, but at the same time telling us we can't do it or trying to put barriers in the way. So something is definitely getting lost in translation between national intent and local delivery. I think we have a challenge with the upcoming elections, and that's touched upon in terms of the brief for this session, Heather, colleagues. We will have a parliamentary election in May, but my problem is momentum. My problem is trajectory. My problem is, do I see anything fundamentally changing in terms of policy around reform post that election, whatever its outcome? And the honest answer is no. I don't. I certainly don't see a reprivatisation of local government, and within local government, the role of those councils and the relationship they have with their communities. So my advice in kind of conclusion, and we've been doing it within North Lanarkshire, is to just go and do what you think is the right thing to do. To take those risks, to break free from some of those constraints, some of which are real, some of which are perceived, and hope they don't find out what you're up to until it's too late. So that risk appetite, perhaps, that's been missing for a period, that over-reliance upon those within central, clearly must knowing best, and therefore directing the policy, even when the evidence tells you that arguably they don't. Now's the time to be bold, I think, within councils, within local government, and within the public sector. I think in doing so, we will push forward that reform agenda at a faster pace. I think we will bring that fragmented piece back together again, because I genuinely believe that no matter where you sit, whether you're central government, local government, a council, a health board, an integrated health and social care partnership, we all want exactly the same things. We all want to see our people thrive. We all want to see people live better lives. We all want to see child poverty and deprivation on the decrease. That's what we all want. So if we're all in the same headspace in terms of mission and ambition, why can't we just get it together to get it done? So that's the challenge to us all. Our behaviours need to change. Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Des, thank you so much. I feel in 5 to 10 minutes you took us on a journey. You took us on a journey from some really quite hard messages, and you've left us with a sort of message for the future. So, conscious of time, I would love to get into that more with you, but I am conscious of time. And what we need to do now is move straight on to our next speaker, who is Jonathan Carr-West, the Chief Executive of LGIU. Jonathan is going to give us the perspective from England, and I dare say he might be referring back to some of what you've said, Des, in your own section for Scotland. But Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Des, and thanks everyone else for joining us. I mean, I think my overall analysis is rather similar to Des's. I was going to, I don't know, nothing good. It is hard to imagine. Look, I was going to talk about this as being a sort of pivotal year, a year at which we're sort of at a crossroads. And then I remembered that I wrote this. A while ago, I wrote, local government stands at a crossroads. In one direction lies the spectre of reduced influence, minimal service provision, and public disengagement. In the other, the promise of reinvigorated civic economies, public services genuinely built around the needs of citizens, and engaged, resilient communities. But I wrote that back in 2013, and I was struck by how much of that applies today. And then I thought that I keep saying local government is at a crossroads, but maybe if you're always at a crossroads, that isn't a crossroad. That's just the permanent state. Maybe we need a different way of describing that sort of encapsulates that permanent sense of this could go one way or the other. Having said that, I do think that in England, this is a pretty pivotal year for local government. It's a year in which, across a number of fronts, I think we will see whether some of the policy that the current government has brought in will actually start to land or not, will actually start to take us down a more positive road or not. So if we think about finance, for example, we need to acknowledge that, at LGIU, we argued very strongly before the last election in the UK that local government needed multi-year financial settlements, that it needed a new funding formula, that it needed an end to sort of competitive bid funding. And government has delivered on those. We have a multi-year settlement coming in. This will be the financial year we're about to enter will be the first year of a multi-year settlement. The government has constructed a new funding formula, what they call Fair Funding 2.0. I think their view is everyone's complaining about it, so it must be fairly balanced because everyone's cross. We will see how this is the year in which we'll see how these things start to land. Do we start to turn a corner finally on local government finance? Do we see people starting to say, actually, this is giving me a bit more headroom, a bit more space? It's too early to tell, but by the end of the year, we will know that. We have our annual finance survey out in the field now. If it's sitting in your inbox and you haven't answered it yet, please do so. We just released the Scotland one at the beginning of the year, and England is in the field now. That will be an early canary in the coal mine. Are people starting to get more confident? Over the rest of the year, we'll see, how many councils do or don't enter into exceptional financial support. It's not exceptional, and it's not really financial support, but it's 30 plus councils currently in it. One prediction I will confidently make is that we won't see any 114s this year, because I think government will divert anything like that into emergency financial support. This will be a pivotal year in terms of local government reorganisation and devolution. By the end of the year, we could have clear decisions about the geography for reorganised unitary councils across England. We could have structural change orders underway in all of those areas. We could be building towards a fixed set of elections to shadow authorities in May 2027 or not. I think we've seen a bit of a sort of, over the last few months, have we seen a wobble in government's intention, or have we just seen a bit of a kind of process road bump? We'll find out. This is going to be a pivotal year. Devolution, which was the driver of all this, I think it's much less clear. We've delayed new mayoral elections to 2028. We're going to have strategic authorities interim strategic authorities, we don't know what to call them, setting up over the course of this year. What's that going to look like? I don't know. So I think the irony that a local government reorganization process that was meant to serve the needs of devolution is actually now kind of standing in for devolution. I think, we've got a big set of local elections coming up in May. There's nearly a dozen councils across England now that are controlled by a political party that didn't exist the last time these seats were contested. They look set to make big gains in these elections as well. I'm not making any comment on the politics of that, but it does bring change. And I think it will stretch. We will see how far the system, the sector's ability for systems and processes to absorb substantial sudden political change, that will be tested in 2026. And then beyond all of this, we have intense pressures on public services. The services that local government spends most of its money on in England: special educational needs, adult social care, temporary accommodation. In all of these areas, demand and cost continues to march not even steadily, exponentially upwards. Again, there's actions in process from the government. We have a Send white paper coming out. We have the Casey review due to report. There's a recognition that you need to tackle these issues, but are there any real ideas on how to do so that aren't just sort of shuffling deficits around from one bit of the system to the other? There's also lots of innovation. There's loads of stuff going on in local government, amazing projects. And the question is going to be, how do we tie all that up? By the end of this year, do we start to see those local innovations in lockstep with big national priorities and changes moving us forward? Or do we just see a fragmentary system where all of us are trying different things to desperately respond to a set of inexorable pressures? And of course, all of that within the context that others have mentioned: climate change, technological change, demographic change. And I think in the end, that fourth category, the service pressures, that's going to be what makes the difference over the course of the year. So, yes, elections, yes, reorganization, yes, changes to finance, but unless we can get a grip on those pressures that drive cost and that drive undesirable outcomes for real people, unless we can get better at prevention, at helping people to live independent, prosperous, healthy lives, because that is our job. And that, unless we can get better at that, then all of the kind of structural shuffling will make no difference whatsoever, and we will take the bad path on that crossroads and not the good path. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. You've certainly outlined a range of different, I suppose, pressures and directions that are applying pressures to councils. You talked about a range of different topics there. You talked about elections to devolution to public service reform. I guess just to ask you for a prediction, if it's not too cheeky, I guess looking back in 12 months' time, would you be willing to give any kind of prediction about, the thing that you think will have had the biggest impact on local government this year, or do you think it's impossible?
I think the biggest impact will be what happens in the end. The biggest impact will be whether we can slow down the rate of increased demand in children's services. That's going to be that's the thing that's driving councils off a cliff edge financially. And so the first thing is to get a grip on that.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a couple of minutes to spare before we move on to our next amazing speaker. I'm going to deviate slightly from our plan and just recognise that Des is not able to stay with us for the full remainder of this session. So Des, you're going off to a very important engagement where you'll be participating in a big announcement about some funding that will be coming to your council and indeed to all of Scotland. So before you sort of slip away in the background, I guess I just wanted to sort of recognise that and say thank you, and also just give you the opportunity to leave us with any final remarks. So you've heard from Jonathan. Guess you haven't heard yet from any of your other panelists. Leave us with a final word, Des, before you go off and meet the minister today.
Sure, Heather. So Jonathan finished with talking about that largest single pressure being the demand in children's services. And you can argue the same at the other end of the spectrum, I think, in terms of adult health and social care. So we're getting squeezed, aren't we, in that respect? But I touched upon the word prevention. And I am an absolute advocate that prevention happens within place and within town, within village, within street, within home, within family, within individual. And the people who have the closest relationship to all of that, that's us. That's local government, that's councils. So if we allow ourselves to be pushed into a service-orientated, reactive response type arrangement, lose our strategic focus, lose our ambition for placing for people, then we do more harm than good. Even if we are pushed in that direction, we must resist it, Heather. And I think, the announcement I'm involved in this morning is an example of, and I was touching upon this as a theme, just breaking away from some of the policy and some of the push and some of that momentum and just creating our own path. There's risk to that, and I'm not talking about going out there and speculating into markets and areas of activity that we're not actually getting experience within. I'm not in that headspace at all. I'm talking about just creating a narrative about what are the strengths of the area and the people that I represent and look after, and that I'm part of, my team's part of. How can we take those strengths and bring them together? Even if the people don't like us doing it. The idea that the public are going to suddenly say, "Yeah, well done, Des and your team, you've turned it around." No, I'm going to get criticised more tomorrow than I was yesterday. That's life in local government, that's life in the local council. But you can make a difference locally, you can make a difference individually, you can certainly make a difference collectively. So I suppose I'll finish with saying these words, Heather. The most important thing about local government and councils is the heart within those organisations, the passion, the people. And we can do a lot with that. We should never forget that, despite those national challenges, those regional challenges, those service challenges. Don't forget the good within. Thank you.
Des, thank you so much. Really grateful for those inspirational words to finish on. So Des, you will be leaving us in about sort of 5-10 minutes. If you've got any more provocation questions for your speakers or the attendees, feel free to leave them with us and we'll do our best to ask them. But for now, we'll just say thank you very much. And indeed, now it's time to hand over to another amazing speaker. So we're really fortunate to have again for the second time, because she also joined us in this event last year. We have Alison Allen, the Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Local Government Association. So Alison, thank you so much for coming to join us again. Based on what you shared with us last year, I can only say that I wait with bated breath to see what you have to say to us this year. So Alison, over to you.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure, Jen, or Heather. And I think the key thing is whenever you do multiple panels, sometimes it's the pressure to come up with something original. So hopefully I've done that today. But just to pick up on Des's point, I think just that kind of impassioned plea, around the value of local government and not turning into putting pressure as a reactive kind of service. I think that speaks a lot to what the Northern Ireland Local Government Association is trying to do as well. And I think it's giving the message out that local government and councils are in effect, in my view, unique in public service terms because of the very accountable relationship. So you think about government departments, maybe one set of politics. Councils are working with multiple sets of politics, particularly with the increase of no overall control in GB, which in Northern Ireland I'll talk about we operate with regularly. Our politicians and our officers are embedded and live in the communities that they serve. So they are know intimately what the people that they serve need. And I think that when you compare that to other public bodies, it's a real asset and we don't talk enough about it. So for those on the call who maybe don't know too much about Northern Ireland, what you will know is that we enjoy fairly turbulent politics and have done over many, many decades. And that has made its way, despite obviously a fairly settled politics since the Good Friday Agreement. That does at times cause disruption to the devolved government in Northern Ireland. And in the last 12 years, we have had 2 periods of downtime where, in effect, we've had no functioning government and no ministers, and the country, in effect, has been run by civil servants. And that's not good for healthy democracy generally, never mind healthy local democracy. But positively, we have had a stable period now since February 24, so approaching 2 years now. And there is a sense that whilst things are very difficult and remain difficult, which I'll talk about in a little moment, that there's no immediate risk of collapse, which is a positive. I think the politicians have accepted that they just have to find ways to work through this. So we have an agreed programme for government, which you would think to yourself suggests that we should have a shared direction for central local services in relation to the outcomes and priorities for the people in this country. But speaking to some of the emerging things coming out of councils in England around no overall control, it may be interesting to you to know that in councils in Northern Ireland operate on the same power sharing basis as the Northern Ireland Executive. So we operate a committee structure and we use proportional representation, which means that our councils, we of our 11 councils, all but one of them operates with no overall control. And the emergence of that one council with overall control from one political party is a very recent phenomenon from our last elections. And indeed, that party is so committed to power sharing at a Stormont level, decided not to veer from the committee system as a kind of an ideological commitment. So whilst they had the opportunity to move and have a more iron grip on the politics and services in their area, they opted not to. And I just thought that context is interesting, just given the emergence of new political parties, which we will probably be dealing with too. We have a smaller unionist party that's been emerging in recent years. They've struggled. They're not particularly transfer friendly in a proportional representation system, but excuse me, they have been increasingly growing stronger in certain councils, and we expect them to have much stronger presence, which will, and they're new, they're emerging, they're not part of the establishment in terms of our politics, and that will cause dynamic change for us in local government as well. So trying to build relationships with that party and understand what their priorities are and how they see the future for local government has been key for us. In terms of what I think, the opportunities and potentially challenges for local government in Northern Ireland are it's moving out of the reactive, and I know Des has referenced this as well. The general conversation and the general acceptance is that we need to move to prevention investing upstream in our services. And officers are on that page, they understand that. But part of my contribution today will be to talk about how the politics interferes with that and interacts with that. And I think that given the short political cycles, which I know we all deal with, it can be extremely hard to secure political support for upstream investment because it can be a very long time before you see the benefit of that. But part of the challenge to us all as officers is how you create a really compelling business case, not just on paper, but it's how you create that narrative in a way that speaks to the politicians and speaks to the communities they serve, that these investments are worth it. Otherwise, we will never break these cycles that previous speakers have talked about. We are continuing to struggle in public services generally in Northern Ireland in relation to the kind of the digital revolution. I was just reflecting as I was preparing for today that I spoke at APSI event. Was it APSI? Oh, I do so many things I can't remember. About a year and a half ago. And a colleague from the LGIU talked about having done a survey with English councils about their kind of current state in relation to digital improvement. And the interesting thing was that nearly 90% of councils who responded to that survey in England are currently either trialling or currently working with AI as part of the delivery of their public services. And unfortunately, I can't say that in Northern Ireland. We are struggling with it immensely, not in the context of the tech itself, but in the context of financial pressures, and that investing in digital capability it's felt like a back office function in many circumstances. So again, securing investment for that kind of infrastructure and that new infrastructure to emerge is key. And as I can imagine for all, there is a lot of suspicion in relation to AI, and dealing with misinformation is massive for us here, but we are very fortunate in Northern Ireland to have probably one of the leading fact-checking organisations, Fact Check NI, who work with us in the last 2 or 3 months there to run a UK-wide session for councillors, because we all have responsibilities in this space as well. So it was important that we supported councillors with tools and information around how they can manage this best, given their very important role. And I think speaking to the role of councils in our unique kind of place-based sense, it's using all of the assets that we have collectively. And just yesterday or the day before, the Northern Ireland Audit Office produced a damning is the best way to describe it, report on the state of the Northern Ireland Civil Service in recent years. And, much promised improvement in the last 5 to 10 years hasn't been delivered. Sickness absence goes up. The efficiencies that were expected as a result of investments and significant new leadership haven't emerged. It was absolutely crushing. And I think what underpins that is how we do business. So what I think is blocking all of that, it's not the business that we do. There's a shared sense that whilst we might differ on very small points, that everyone's generally committed to doing the right thing and we're pushing generally in the right direction in most policy areas. However, the how we do business is absolutely critical. And I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about that now. So again, speaking to Des's point about, councils being massive multidisciplinary organisations, we understand how to work not just with complex politics, but with varied services working in a really multidisciplinary space. And I think not enough is made of that skill in the context of being able to bring all of that under clear vision, clear strategy, and clear delivery. By our partners in central government. And that seems to be the dealing with silos seems to be the biggest challenge. And I was chatting to a colleague yesterday and I said, in some ways, actually, sometimes tankers are just too big to turn, and turning them will take generations. And perhaps we have to accept that whilst the ambition might be to address these things in central government and public services generally, that it's going to take a long time. And they're just ignoring the obvious solution right under their nose, which is to work more collaboratively with local government in relation to place-based delivery, place-based ambition, and place-based strategy. Because we know we can do these things very easily. We're practiced. We're practiced at managing our own complex services. We're practiced at bringing partners, given the kind of the community planning responsibilities that we have in Northern Ireland, and it just seems so obvious. So part of what we're trying to do is to actually say, don't make things difficult for yourself. Go on that journey. It's important, but it's going to take you a long time. And look and play to your strengths, and play to our strengths as well. So I suppose I wanted to talk just briefly about our appetite to risk, and this has been an ongoing conversation in Northern Ireland too. And interestingly, I hear a lot of politicians say to me about we need our officers to take more risk. We need, stretching ourselves a little bit further. We'll never deal with some of these big, wicked societal challenges unless we do that. But, and I agree with that. But the flip of that is, I think we have found ourselves in an environment whereby for officers, and indeed for some politicians, risk is just, it's just something that can be basically you can get beaten over the head with taking a risk if it fails. There's no acceptable level of failure in public services in Northern Ireland. And there have been a number of fairly high profile situations whereby the officials are the collateral damage of that failure. So it's never the politics. It's all with the officials, and I can tell you now these are experienced officials who know how to know how to work proper governance, know how to work with political decision making, but the officers seem to be the collateral damage. That creates an environment where officers who are creative, innovative, have so much to give, become more risk averse. So whilst at an official level, we do have work to do. There's no doubt about it, and Nilga's really passionate about that. But I don't think we can ignore the politics. And ignore the fact that actually the officers and politicians need to be laser focused together and locked in together, and there needs to be an understanding that we won't win everything, and that when we do, we need to understand, we need to learn, evaluate, move on quickly, and move away from the blame game.
Alison, thank you so much. I just need to come in and say I could listen to you all day.
Oh, thank you.
And I would love to get you and Des into a bit of a tete-a-tete about risk and risk appetites, and you've given some slightly different perspectives there. Can I just ask you to just provide some just very quick finishing remarks, because I'm just really keen to keep to schedule and hear from our other two speakers.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Alison.
So very briefly towards the end, I just wanted to share a couple of things that may be useful for English colleagues in relation to reform. So Northern Ireland Councils went through a significant exercise in 2015, and recent evaluations of that have shown that clarity of purpose, clear clarity of purpose is absolutely key, and not focusing on short-term savings. So the business case which underpinned that exercise in 2015 was fundamentally flawed from the start, and we haven't seen some of the efficiencies, and that has been detrimental to the reputation of all public services. Don't be forgetting about the importance of merging organisations. It's not just structural, it's about your elected members, it's about your staff. Culture is so important, and those things take time. And there is, again, a recognition increasingly at Stormont level now that where they failed to support local government in that exercise in 2015 was with upfront investment. It's that concept of investing to save. So we had this exercise, councils had to fund it themselves. There was no investment in the new systems to ensure that we delivered those efficiencies for our residents. So I thought, just for colleagues, it may be interesting to hear from our experience as well, and we have a lot more to share on that if people are interested.
Alison, thank you so much. Look, you have covered a huge amount of ground there, and we really appreciated the context that you gave before your remarks. So huge amount to come back to in our Q&A. For now, though, we're going to move straight to our next speaker. So big thanks to you, Alison. We are going to do a short hop, skip and a jump geographically, and we are going to hear next from Pauline Mulligan. So Pauline is the Chief Executive of the Local Government Management Agency in Ireland. And Pauline, really delighted to have you here today, and very much looking forward to having you on our panel today. We weren't fortunate enough to have you last year, so very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Heather, and good morning, everybody. I just took up this position, well, the beginning of January last year, so I'm just a year into the job now. So it's great to be with you and to hear the perspectives from around the table as well. Look, I guess, so I'm Chief Executive of the Local Government Management Agency. We essentially we provide professional services and supports for the 31 local authorities in Ireland, just to say that. Just reflecting on, I guess, Des's and Jonathan's and then Alison's comments there, I guess I'm probably coming at this maybe in a bit more positive kind of approach, positive note, recognising the challenges that others have spoken about. But I guess when Jonathan spoke about that crossroads, maybe it feels like we're on a roundabout rather than a crossroads. So we need to kind of get off the roundabout now. And some of that, I think, is around taking things into our own hands and influencing the things we can change. And I think we're probably fortunate in Ireland, because I think from listening to the discussion, that same issue of the kind of the tension between national and local, and national policy and local policy, national delivery, local delivery, and what's best in what circumstance. And that is very much at the core of the work of a new local democracy task force, which has been set up in the middle of last year. I'm on the task force very luckily. So it's a fantastic opportunity to input into that discussion, along with elected members, along with the executive, along with the governance structures that we have in Ireland over local government, with the relevant government departments and various other government departments as well. So I think that conversation is happening. We've been working since March. We're due to present our report in the next couple of months. But it goes to the heart of a lot of the things that people have been talking about around the table. The other thing I just want to talk about as well is the use of data and to underpin our policy approach. And then the final thing, digitalisation, which again, most people have spoken about. But going back to the Local Democracy Task Force, when I think about the things that we're looking at in that task force, they cut across a lot of the things people mentioned. We're looking at structures, we're looking at funding, we're looking at functions, and we're looking at governance. So structures is around that relationship between the executive and the elected members, and where that power lies, and how to support elected members to take back more of that policy making role, and work collaboratively with the executive. It's about the structures as well, in terms of municipal districts, devolving more responsibility to more local levels within local authority areas in Ireland. And it's also a refreshed emphasis and look at towns. We're looking at funding and how we can, I suppose, improve the fiscal autonomy and the financial stability of local government, timing of financial decisions, charges, local property tax, commercial commercial property rates. All of those things are being discussed. And then we're also looking at that relationship between national and local and how we can devolve more functions from national to local. And also that engagement between national and local, and what are the mechanisms we have in place to support that engagement at a political level and at an executive level. So I think there's going to be some really interesting recommendations coming out of that. We're also looking at governance and the number of councillors and how we provide more support for councillors to do their jobs better. But I guess it'll be interesting to see. We're a task force. We're working, it has definitely helped the relationship between the elected members and the executive at a national level to try and bring those voices together and enhance and improve collaboration. And I think that will be a definite plus for the future. I guess we report as a task force, we give the report to the minister. Let's see then how the minister and national government decide to actually implement it and take it forward. But I think going back to, and I was trying to think about things to talk about that would help build our foundations and create a better foundation on which we can deliver better services for the public. That's essentially what we all want to do, and others have spoken about that. And for me, the two other things, apart from that reform agenda, which hopefully will feature this year and then into future years, strengthening local democracy, I think the other two pieces that we have in our gift is around the data piece and the digitalization. So data, again, in our own in local government management agency, we set up a pilot project 3 years ago, which we've just kind of decided to make permanent now, a central data unit. And that's really about setting up governance and structures and standards for the collection of data across all local authorities and providing a support centrally to do that. What are the governance? What are the standards? What are the mechanisms? What are the systems we use to collect data? And that will cut across all of the priority areas that we have. It will help housing, infrastructure, planning, all of these areas to improve the efficiency and to help us to make better decisions for the citizens we're serving. I have some very good examples and I won't dwell too much on them because I know we're under a bit of time pressure. But I think there's lots of examples of where we have primary research that have helped us, for example, even in recruitment and retention, where that data piece is really important. Doing the primary research, talking to the stakeholders, and then helping that to inform the way you recruit staff and the way you keep them. Because in the current environment, obviously, in any sector, people don't stay in a job for very long. There's a lot of mobility, which is good. But at the same time, you want to keep people in the job. So we've done some really interesting research that's going to help us in that area. Just finally then, to move on to the area of digitalisation, we have a target of 90%. Well, we have a plan, which is a great thing to have, and a target of 90% of applicable services to be digitalised by 2030. A really tall order. At the moment, the last couple of years, we've been again doing that foundational piece, identifying what's the baseline, where are we at now in order to measure the success into 2030. We're looking at, I mean, essentially we want modern, secure systems and a digitally skilled workforce. So they're the other two things that have to go along with that. But we're doing the kind of baselining, the collecting of data around where we're at now and building dashboards for each of the local authorities to help them measure success as well. Our focus this year is on grants and I guess again we're looking at grants, licenses and permits, but I suppose the challenge is you're looking at using existing systems. So in an ideal world, you'd start from scratch on a blank page and build a new system to digitalize all of these services in one platform. That's not real life. So we are looking at the existing systems we have to see how we can build on those and evolve those to reach our target and to support all 31 local authorities. Also looking at things like shared procurement to leverage the purchasing power that we have. And we're also looking at our operating models across the sector to see how are we set up to deliver on these targets and to deliver the digital agenda for our citizens. AI, somebody mentioned that already. We have adopted AI guidelines late last year. Now we need to move on to developing policies and standards to help all staff in all local authorities to adopt, because it's challenging, because there is that suspicion piece there and citizens need the reassurance that we're operating certain standards. So I have a few examples of things, again, maybe can come back to them, Heather, given the time pressure, but Last year we saw some kind of, and I think that's the thing. We need to look at the good practice. We need to shine a light on the examples where we have got things right, where we have introduced robotics, where we have efficiency and accuracy and savings, even in terms of the full-time staff equivalent back to the data. What's the impact of that service in terms of the automation that you've brought in? And that sets, I suppose, a gold standard then, and others are inclined to follow it. We've done something similar on e-planning, which again has improved the customer experience in terms of planning applications, which again will feed into more efficient delivery of our housing challenges. We also finally have our Security Operations Centre, which we manage centrally in Local Government Management Agency. For all of the local authorities, we're rolling that out, and that makes sense to develop that capability and that capacity centrally. Cybersecurity is a threat we're all facing, and so this is a real challenge. But how do we do that efficiently and in a robust way for all our local authorities? So they're kind of the three areas that I feel we can take a little bit of power back. Obviously, we're lucky we have the task force now. Data is essential to help us improve our services. Digitalization is a must, but we need to do it with the guardrails as well. So I think, for me, it's about taking back some of that power and seeing, well, where can we direct this traffic? Where can we direct it and influence it? So they're my thoughts for the moment, Heather. I'm happy to come back in on the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pauline. And look, just fascinating to see some of the parallels between what you had to say about taking the power back and the way that Des framed it, which was being bold and just sort of getting out there and doing it. So, yeah, fascinating, Pauline. You've described a system that's actively asking itself some pretty fundamental questions. So I can only say that we'd love to have you back this time next year and find out where things have got to with your task force and, where those recommendations are sitting. I won't ask you to make any predictions at this stage. But without further ado, we have one more speaker to hear from. And rather than a quick hop, skip, and a jump over a small geographical area, we're going all the way to Catherine Arndt, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Victorian Local Government Association in Australia, so the VLGA. So, Catherine, thank you so much for being here today. We'd love to have an introduction from you and tell us about your organisation before you tell us about your predictions for the year ahead for local government in your area.
Thank you, Heather and LGIU. It's an absolute pleasure to be joining you all here this evening where I am and this morning where you are. Look, I mean, there's so many similarities, isn't we are a global community indeed. Before I jump into some of the areas that I really wanted to focus on, a little bit about the Victorian Local Governance Association. We celebrated our 30-year anniversary last year. We're established, we're an independent member-run organisation that really focuses on supporting councils and councillors in delivering much needed and excellent services to their community through good governance. So our focus is really on looking at how do we support the council and in particular the councillors at a governance level. So that's where I'm really going to try and focus on some of the issues and I guess, crystal ball gazing into the future for the topic today. In Australia, it's not dissimilar. There's a continuation of distrust and disrespect from other levels of government, combined with we've identified a lack of understanding and appreciation by many voters, the citizens, as to the actual role of local government and elected representatives at the local level. And then on the back of this, we're seeing an increase rising of organised groups who are spreading misinformation and disinformation in pursuit of their own interests. But this further, of course, diminishes the trust in local government, but also other levels of government in Australia. We've also noticed an increasing amount of scrutiny and intervention from multiple integrity agencies in the local government sector. So in Victoria, for example, in all states of Australia, we have a state government. Then, of course, we have our federal government, which would be the equivalent of your central government. So in Victoria, the state government can actually put in monitors into councils to work with the councillor group to sort of monitor their performance and help them at a governance level work cohesively as a group. this comes at considerable expense to the council and ultimately the ratepayer. We see councils being dismissed by the state government and administrators being appointed at, again, considerable expense to the council itself and ultimately the community. Then we have our ongoing sort of councillor conduct panel processes, which are often confusing, often weaponised by complainants and the respondents. So councillors complaining about other councillors and weaponising these processes, and usually are ineffective in driving meaningful change, which only again feeds into community distrust and, more importantly, is diverting resources away from service delivery and more inward looking to resolve what are essentially governance and cultural issues. I wanted to talk a little bit about how that all then relates to this growing global trend of incivility towards elected representatives and also public officers. In Australia, we're finding that councillors and staff are increasingly tackling issues stemming from rising levels of negative, abusive, and sometimes threatening rhetoric. Only late last year, we saw a CEO of a regional council in Victoria who jumped out of the office just to get his morning cup of coffee, having a hot cup of coffee thrown over him by a community member who was unhappy with something that council had done. So this really makes the current working environment for councillors not okay, but also not okay for staff members as well. And we're really concerned about how that compromises the foundations of local democracy. We've seen rising levels of incivility and hostility in public council meetings. So not only does that impact the elected representatives themselves, but also just community members who've just dropped in to hear a discussion and participate in discussions in their local council chamber, feeling frightened and, council meetings having to be shut down. We've identified the escalation of this issue through a number of ways. We've undertaken an Australian-wide research program with the Australian Research Council, looking at incivility, and in particular, that research project looked at the trajectories of women in local government. And we also conducted an inaugural 2024 Victorian Councillor Census, which identified bullying and harassment as a significant issue for the local government sector. The recent 2025 Councillor Census that we conducted in October, again, is showing a similar trend. In fact, in 2024, concerningly, more than 80% of respondents to that census, they were all councillors who responded, had experienced threatening or intimidating behaviour in their role as a councillor. And unsurprisingly, but of course concerningly, 41% of women versus 26% of men have reported that they regularly experience threatening or intimidating behaviour from another councillor. So we see these governance issues, these cultural issues, as significant challenges for the sector, but also an opportunity. We've invested heavily in enhancing support networks for councillors, both professionally and personally. We've called out to the state government to invest in a dedicated sort of support hotline that councillors can access to support them in their roles, allow them to do their role, because what we're seeing is that women in particular, and even men, are saying, I don't want to stand again as a councillor, or, you know what, I'm going to step down during my term of council. And of course, this has consequences as well in terms of local democracy. Interestingly, or was it an unintended consequence or not, I'm not sure, but in Victoria in 2020, the state government legislated for single member ward structures in Victorian councils, with the exception of remote rural regional councils. What that has meant is that if a councillor does step down during the term of, the council term, or resigns, or it's vacated for some other reason, that council and that community actually has to fund a by-election as opposed to a count back. And again, that is a considerable expense to the community. So we're really trying to look at how we can redivert councils away from having to respond to what are essentially governance and cultural issues. How do we work with councils and councillors to support their culture, their governance, build their resilience? We're actually on the 27th of February running a national conference on the very topic of incivility and how it's undermining local democracy. And I guess I'll just finish on the other issue which all panelists have spoke about, and that is the financial sustainability issues for councils. So long-term sustainability is, front of mind for councils, and it's so important that we get the governance stuff right, because when we're constantly spending money on trying to fix that up and not look at what is more importantly, how do we support our communities into the future, then, we're further eroding what is, as we say, the most important place-based service delivery system that we can have. So I guess I'll end on that note, but very happy to take questions as part of the Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think what was fascinating about that is that you described challenges which we know are common to all of our countries. But Catherine, you really sort of shone a light on the particular way that you're working to address. And I got a sense of a huge amount of activity and investment that you're making in your member councils. So thank you so much for taking us through that. So thank you also now to all of our speakers. So we've heard from people across 5 different countries. We've heard some amazing perspectives. We've heard some common perspectives and some different ones. So now is the time to move to our attendees. So at this point in the event, we're going to ask the question of you who's here in the room, and we're going to set up some live polling, as we are keen to know from you who's here, what are your immediate and long-term priorities that you're thinking about for this year? So we did this exercise last year, and I'm personally really fascinated to see what we hear today, and also see how that compares against what we heard last year. So we're going to have 4 different polling questions. And before we kind of ask you your views and reveal the big questions that we're going to ask you, I just wanted to say, and just to reinforce how useful and insightful the insights that we get from events like this are. So the information that we got from last year's event really fed into the work and the resources that LGIU then commissioned. And that will obviously absolutely happen again this year. So please give your answers knowing that we'll be making full use of those answers in the work that we do throughout this year. So without further ado, let's reveal the polling. So Richard and Jen, I think what we need to do is we need to have people around the room engage with the polling through either the number that you can see on the screen or through the QR code. So I hope that as I've been talking and providing this introduction, people have been finding their way to the poll. So why don't we unveil the first question? So the first question is about prioritization. So we'd love to hear from you what you think from the list below are the top 3 priorities for local government for you personally in 2026. So we've given you a real set of options to answer, and we're asking you to pick 3 only, if that's possible. So very interesting to see the bars going up and down. We seem to be in a little bit of a kind of close race at the top of our poll. Although, as I keep talking, it seems that financial sustainability seems to be pulling away as the top priority for local government. So currently we've got 55% of people who are saying that's their top priority, slipping down just a little bit. So unfortunately, we can't seem to see absolutely all the answers on the slide. So let's just scroll down a little bit if we can and see what we've got at the bottom of the slide. Well, I mean, I think that's very interesting and not just a little bit surprising. So I'm personally quite surprised to see climate change so low down the list there, and also having heard from our speakers to see 5% of people talk about responding to demographic changes. I think possibly that's lower than we might expect. But going back to the top of our poll, let's just check in on our top responses. So we're back to 57% of people saying financial sustainability is their top priority for local government in 2026. So how does that compare to last year? So if one of my colleagues can supply me with the answer, I'll be able to tell you whether those results are the same as last year or whether they're quite different. Jen, Richard, how do they compare? That's the 20th. Thank you. Thank you. So I haven't quite seen that on the screen there. So last year we said the same thing. We said improving the financial sustainability of the sector was the top, tackling the housing and homelessness crisis, investing in transforming in infrastructure and services. Take me back to the poll, if you will, please. So I would say that's some fairly consistent answers, but obviously we've got a big change in relation to the investment and transformation of infrastructure and services. So fascinating to see that growing the local economy has shot up the priority list. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for giving us your answers. I think we'll move on to our next question now, which is priorities for the future. So we're asking you to think about a slightly longer term horizon here. So rather than this year, think about the future. Maybe think about the next 10 years, for example. And does your answer change, or is it going to stay the same? So it looks very clearly like people's long-term priorities are quite different from their short-term priorities. So we've got a clearly different set of responses here, which I think is fascinating. So we're seeing financial sustainability much lower down our priority list, and we're seeing responding to demographic changes right at the top instead of closer to the bottom. But climate change still fairly low in people's priority lists, which I think feels surprising. Maybe something we can get into in our Q&A section. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So that's looking fairly stable now. So we've got as our top priority, we've got responding to demographic changes. And then in a four-place tie for the second place, we've got growing the local economy, adoption of AI, financial sustainability, and public health issues. How does that compare to what we heard last year? Very different. So that's a completely different set of responses. And I can only wonder why that is. And I can only hope that we get some insights into that in our next section. So thank you, everybody, for providing this sort of fascinating and slightly surprising insight. So let's move on to our next question. So our next question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you about the future of local government? So we also asked this question last year, so we are going to do another direct comparison. Let's see. So we've got some very different responses there. We've got responses across the whole spectrum, which again is fascinating. But what we're seeing is an average score of just under 7, which I'd say is fairly optimistic. Great stuff. Well, thank you, everyone. So tell us how our optimism levels are feeling compared to this time next year. So today we've heard a fairly optimistic response, and the most common choice was 8 out of 10. And last year, I feel like people were less optimistic last year. So very interesting to see. I don't know if we can credit to our amazing speakers or just how people are feeling about the crossroads or, the opportunities that you have in 2026. But what we're seeing and what we're hearing is a slightly more optimistic feeling in the room compared to last year. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I think we have one more question for you before we're going to turn to the floor. So the next question is to ask you to give one word of what the Council of the Future looks like to you personally. So what we should see is that when people give their responses, we should see a lovely word cloud emerge. Okay, so thank you to everybody who contributed their one word. So what we're seeing there in the biggest font, so the most popular response is innovative, which is great and positive. We're also seeing integrated, and then we've got some fewer responses, which are slightly less positive in nature. But overall, I'd say that's a strongly positive response from our people here in the room about the councils of the future. Okay, so I think that's it for our poll. And let's see how that compared to last year. So last year we also had innovative, but we had quite a lot of other words came through last year. So last year we had collaborative, resilient, but fascinating to see that innovative is the word that's carried through from last year to this year. So thank you. Right, so at this point in the session, we have just over 20 minutes to really kind of get more in depth into some of the issues and some of the responses that we've heard here today. So we're going to move into a Q&A session. So we'd love to have questions from the floor for our amazing panel. And that can be their responses to what you've heard from the poll, or it can be to pick up on anything that you heard them say in their speaker remarks. So I'm going to start because that's my privilege as chair, and I'm just going to ask everyone on the panel for 20 to 30 seconds just to give me your kind of immediate response to what you heard there from that poll. Were you surprised? Or were you not surprised? Did that, was that what you kind of expected to see? So very quickly, while people put together their questions for the panel, I'm going to go first of all to Jonathan to tell us his response to what we heard from the poll.
Thanks, Heather. So I guess I don't think I think that it seems to me that in terms of where people were, there's. I mean, look, obviously you're going to get different results, partly because it's just a different group of people, but it did feel to me that there was a bit of a shift from the thinking about the challenges that surround us to the thinking about what we need to be in order to tackle those challenges. So the emphasis on innovation, the sort of way that AI and skills and stuff came up the agenda. So I think, in a sense, there's two useful parts to the conversation, aren't there? There's sort of what are the drivers that are going to shape local government and and particularly the context in which we're operating, and all of the speakers spoke about those, whether those are economies, or whether they're some of the really sort of challenging, I don't know, if cultural issues, the stuff Catherine talked about the attitude to democracy, the pressures that councillors are under, however we describe that set of issues. You've got all that stuff, but then what do councils need to be? What are the sort of what type of institution and what type of flexibility and agility and innovation and skills do you need to build in? I think that is a really interesting. You can't separate those two conversations, but that's a really interesting place to go. What do we need to be in order to respond to the world that's developing around us?
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, thank you for responding to my question with a set of questions. So we'll hand those questions over
I assumed that you would know I would do that.
in order of our speakers. So some quick responses, please, from Alison, then Pauline, and Catherine before we move to the floor.
Totally agree with what Jonathan has said. I suppose it's in some ways I would phrase it slightly different, but it's not about the business we do, it's how we do the business. So that sense that resilience and flexibility will see us through, and it's our values and behaviours less than anything else. And I think it's interesting that the change between 2 years, you talked about climate change, Heather, and I just wonder if the world around us, there's a real sense of there's some more fundamental threats to politics, democracy, and that people are realizing that now. So you couldn't ask for a more significant threat to civilization than climate change. But I think people are clearly in the space of thinking more pensively about the kind of the macro environment and what that means. And I think that's quite scary, given just history generally. So I think it's interesting that those things haven't appeared.
Yeah, and we've got a great question that's just come through in the Q&A exactly on that topic, but we'll come back to that. So, Pauline, your quick takeaways and responses.
Yeah, I guess based on my kind of the approach that I had taken to my original remarks, I'm not surprised, and I'm kind of reassured that we're talking about the foundational elements that will help us kind of steer the ship in the future. Like I think the fact that financial stability is there as a short term, that is a short term threat. I think we all see that, so not surprised there. And then the housing, homelessness, infrastructure. I mean, I'm interested in the climate change. I know there's a question about that. I think it's interesting to see why that is slipping down. Is it that we have plans in place? I know, for example, is that part of it that people kind of feel, well, we've put structures in place. We have our targets. We have our plans. We are working on it. It's hard stuff. It's not easy. But like the SDG goals are embedded, sustainability is embedded in the way local authorities do their business. So is there a sense that we are doing what we can? Okay, there's more urgency required nationally and internationally, but is there a sense that, well, we're kind of doing as much as we can there, but we also have these immediate challenges like housing and homelessness to deal with, and we need to prioritize those from a human point of view in the short term. So I think, look at innovation. It's great to see that is at the heart of everything we do. It has to be. We talked at the beginning before we came online about the severe weather events of the last couple of days and the flooding and the immediacy of that and the speed of that, and then the response that local authorities are required to come in with. So I think, look at it is that need to be agile, responsive, and innovative in the way we do things to support our communities. Yeah.
Thank you, Pauline. Catherine.
Thanks, Heather. Look, I find Joe's comment in the chat. I mean, I would ask that question as well. I wonder whether climate change is not on the list because there is a sense that perhaps there are other stakeholders who have potentially more influence or need to be involved in the solution. And that is somewhat outside of the control of local government itself. It requires that collaboration that we've all talked about over the course of the panel. Absolutely pleasing to see innovation up there. I don't think we saw resilience up for this year, but it was on last year. I really believe that, in order to resolve some of the governance and cultural issues, certainly that I described that exist within Australia, and I'm not quite sure of what the landscape is in the UK, the sector itself needs to take risks and it needs to be bold and it needs to probably address some of the elephants in the room about systemic change. Are there some systemic barriers to good governance? We're talking about a model of local government or a system of local government that has been established a very long time ago in a very different environment. And, in a very different sort of relationship with its respective other levels of government. There needs to be, I think, some frank and open conversations about that. And I think it's most important that the sector itself leads that, as opposed to wait for the other levels of government to do it to the sector. So I guess I'd just throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we've heard some quick responses from all of our panelists in relation to the polling, and in the meantime, as we've recognised, we've had some really brilliant questions come through in the Q&A section.